I'm the asshole, the scumbag, the dickhead, the home wrecker, the piece of garbage your mother warned you about and your father would put a fist through if he ever found out. I've heard them all, every single one. And the thing is, I earned every last syllable. My name is Aiden Atkins, and I have relationships with married women. Not sex, relationships. There's a difference, and if you don't understand that distinction yet, you will by the time I'm done talking. Because this isn't a confession designed to make you feel sorry for me. This is the truth, ugly, complicated, sometimes darkly funny, about how a reasonably intelligent man from Central Florida spent the better part of a decade sleeping with other men's wives, and what happened when the bill finally came due. I'm 36 years old. I live in a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, single-story house outside Orlando, the kind of plain stucco box that Florida builds by the tens of thousands. White walls, tile roof, a small deck out back where I grill when the afternoon thunderstorms cooperate. I'm a cybersecurity engineer, independent contractor, which means I spend my days hunting through complex systems looking for the places they break. Turns out that skill set applies to more than software. 7 women, that's the count. 7 married women over the course of several years. Some were quick, a month, 2 months, the initial thrill wearing off before the sheets cooled. But 2 of them I'd call long-term. One lasted longer than the average American marriage, which according to the Census Bureau sits somewhere around 8 years. Think about that for a second. I maintained an affair longer than most people maintain their vows. I was married once myself. 15 years to the first woman I ever kissed. Her name was Jess, and I thought what I felt was love. I was 20, she was 19, and looking back with the clarity that only comes from distance and disaster, I can see it for what it actually was. A decent amount of like welded to desperation. Jess needed out of her family situation, and situation is the polite word for it. Her old man was a mean drunk. Her mother had checked out emotionally sometime around 1994 and never checked back in. Jess hadn't finished high school. She'd spent most of her junior year dropping acid and dodging truant officers, which sounds like a recipe for catastrophe, but actually produced a sharp, cunning survival instinct. She looked at me, young, employed, stable, eager, and saw a lifeboat. I looked at her and saw a girl who'd let me touch her if I kept the lifeboat floating. Smart girl, actually. Good instincts. She traded affection for security, and for 15 years neither of us examined the exchange rate too closely. We never had kids. We made a decent living, well, I did, and by extension so did she. We bought a house, filled it with furniture from rooms to go, hosted the occasional barbecue for neighbors who didn't interest us, and settled into the long, gray quiet of a marriage running on inertia. The sex was sparse. I'm not saying that to be cruel. Jess had reasons I didn't understand until much later, early trauma that she'd buried so deep it took a therapist with a pickaxe to reach it. At the time, all I knew was that intimacy felt like pulling teeth, and if I wanted any connection at all, I had to work for it like I was training for a championship fight. So I studied. I know how that sounds. Most guys, when they hit a dry spell, buy their wife flowers or try that thing they saw in a video at 2 in the morning. I went to the library. I'm an engineer. Engineers solve problems by studying complex interactions, building models, and testing them. So that's what I did, except instead of network protocols, the system I was trying to crack was human sexuality. I found a copy of Masters and Johnson's Human Sexual Response on my parents' bookshelf when I was 12. 12 years old, sitting cross-legged on the carpet of my mother's living room, reading about the 4 phases of sexual response while my brother Jonathan played Nintendo in the next room. Most boys my age had a theoretical understanding that went something like, insert tab A into slot B, move around, done. I was studying the female orgasmic response cycle and the significance of the plateau phase, that long, sustained period of arousal where, if you pay attention, if you learn to read the signals, you can hold a woman at the edge of climax for what feels like forever. She can stay there riding wave after wave until she either begs you to stop or loses consciousness entirely. They call it edging now. Masters and Johnson documented the mechanics in 1966. I was just a kid who found the textbook early. The Height Report came next. Sheer Height's massive survey of female sexuality. I read it cover to cover twice. By the time I was old enough to actually apply any of this knowledge, I had a theoretical foundation that most men never bother to build in a lifetime. That's the tactical side. Technique, mechanics, the engineering of pleasure. And it helped, don't get me wrong, it helped enormously. Being able to actually satisfy a woman physically opens doors that stay locked for a lot of men. But here's the thing nobody tells you about becoming good in bed. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. Not even close. Because the real curriculum, the one that actually matters, the one that separates the men who have brief, disposable affairs from the men who build the kind of connections that make women risk everything, isn't about sex at all. It's about understanding the most complex organism on the planet, the human female. Now, before anyone throws this book across the room, hear me out. I'm not saying women are more valuable than men or that complexity equals superiority. Men have advantages that come precisely from our relative simplicity. Focus, linear drive, the ability to lock onto a target and pursue it without distraction. One theory, and I find it compelling, is evolutionary. Men were the hunters. Survival depended on tracking a single animal across miles of terrain without losing concentration. Women were the gatherers, the child raisers, the ones managing 15 tasks simultaneously while keeping the tribe alive. Their brains developed differently. Not better, not worse. Different. The result is a level of emotional processing, of simultaneous awareness, of what psychologists now call emotional intelligence, that operates on a plane most men can barely perceive, let alone navigate. Women don't just feel one thing at a time. They feel everything at once, and they're tracking how every person in the room feels too, and they're cross-referencing all of it against every interaction they've had that week, that month, that year. It's staggering when you really look at it. It's also beautiful, and that's the real education, not the books, not the technique. The on-the-job training of actually paying attention to these beautifully complex beings. Sitting with them. Listening. Not the performative nodding most men do while mentally undressing them, but actual listening. The kind where you remember what she said 3 weeks ago about her sister's wedding and bring it up at the right moment. The kind where you notice the micro-expression that crosses her face when she mentions her boss and you file it away because it matters to her, which means it matters to you. Most men aren't up for this. I get it. It's like attending a calculus lecture for 16 hours a day. The processing power required is enormous. But if you find it genuinely fascinating, the way I find it fascinating, the way some people find astrophysics or chess or the migration patterns of whales fascinating, then it becomes effortless, rewarding, addictive even. Not every woman is the same. I understand that. My ex-wife, Jess, was a 3 Sigma outlier, a statistical anomaly shaped by trauma I didn't know about until it was far too late. But the vast majority of women I've encountered operate on a recognizable system. Complex, yes. Infinitely variable in the details, absolutely. But there are patterns, rhythms, a kind of emotional architecture that, once you learn to see it, reveals itself everywhere. You also need to learn to share your own emotions. I know. I can hear the eye rolls from every fishing buddy and fantasy football chat room on the continent. Showing feelings will get you mocked on a boys' trip, sure. But it's currency on a date, pure, spendable currency. And here's the paradox that makes being a modern man so delightfully impossible. You have to be vulnerable enough to tear up when she tells you about the awful thing that happened at work, but also tough enough to break someone's jaw if they disrespect her, and then feel bad about the broken jaw afterward. It's a tightrope strung between 2 versions of masculinity that contradict each other completely, and you have to walk it without a net. But here's what men miss the most. The thing that opens the door wider than any technique, any emotional intelligence, any perfectly timed vulnerability. Most husbands, even the good ones, believe their job is to provide the basics. A house, food on the table, financial security, physical safety. Love her, be faithful, check the boxes. And then they expect their wives to be good mothers, good partners, good lovers, to perform their role in the domestic machine without complaint. What gets lost in all that machinery is the woman herself. Not the wife, not the mother, the woman, her aspirations, her goals, her private burning desire for something that belongs only to her. The creative dream she mentioned once on a road trip that nobody followed up on. The career she quietly shelved. The version of herself she imagined at 22, before the mortgage and the minivan and the slow, grinding compression of a life built for everyone except her. Without support, without encouragement, without someone who sees that inner fire and fans it instead of smothering it with laundry schedules, she starts to suffocate. Slowly, imperceptibly. The way a room loses oxygen when the door is sealed. You don't notice until you're gasping. Try it sometime. Hold your breath and see how long you last. See at what point the need for air overrides every other consideration, loyalty, commitment, fear, guilt. See at what point you will do absolutely anything for a single breath. That's what I gave them. A breath. I'd find out what the inner woman wanted, the real her, not the role she played, and I'd encourage it, support it, celebrate it, ask about it, remember it, make her feel like that dream, that identity, that self wasn't just valid but vital. And they'd bloom every single time. But the real curriculum, the study of these beautifully complex beings, I used it to destroy families instead of build them. So why? Why take everything I'd learned and weaponize it? Great question. The honest answer is that I didn't think of it as weaponizing anything. Not at first. Not for a long time, actually. The rationalizations built themselves the way coral builds a reef, slowly, layer by layer, until there's a whole ecosystem of justification sitting beneath the surface and you can't even see the ocean floor anymore. It started with the rules. Whose rules, exactly? Society's. The ones cobbled together over thousands of years by humans trying to survive on a spinning rock hurtling through a universe that doesn't care whether we live or die. Religious rules. Handed down by institutions that have historically been, let's say, less than consistent in their own adherence to moral standards. Legal rules. The same system that says marijuana is a federal crime, but opioid manufacturers can kill 100,000 people and pay a fine. Or nature's rules. Because nature has a very different playbook. Nature wants genetic diversity. That's the whole game: spread the gene pool, produce variety, give the species a better shot at surviving whatever catastrophe comes next. That's why men are hardwired to respond when a beautiful woman walks past. It's not choice. It's not character. It's 10 million years of evolutionary programming firing every neuron in the limbic system. In engineering, we have a concept called an unstable system. Picture a ball balanced on the tip of a pyramid. Technically, it can stay there. All forces are in equilibrium. But the slightest disturbance, a gust of wind, a vibration, a stray thought, and the ball rolls. Monogamy, I decided, was an unstable system. Two humans, biologically wired for variety, promising to restrict themselves to each other for the duration of their lives, the whole arrangement held in place by nothing more than willpower and social pressure. The engineering math didn't support it. Most bridges built that way collapse. Everybody cheats the system somewhere. Speed limits, tax deductions, insurance claims, that little white lie about where you were Thursday night. We just draw our lines in different places and pretend our line is the moral one. I drew mine further out than most people, that's all. I broke bad. It happened during my marriage to Jess. Year 15. I'd spent a decade and a half in a relationship that provided companionship and stability, but had slowly drained my reservoir of physical and emotional intimacy until there was nothing left but sediment at the bottom. I punched out, started seeing someone new. The slight problem, the detail that transforms a sad story into a reckless one, is that I didn't actually get divorced first. I just left. Started dating while still legally married. Jess was not thrilled with this arrangement. The divorce was ugly the way only Florida divorces can be: humid, drawn out, and absurdly expensive. I split everything down the middle and handed over $2,000 a month in spousal support, which is a significant hit when you're an independent contractor whose income fluctuates with the cybersecurity threat landscape. But I wrote those checks and I didn't complain, because the alternative was staying in that airless room and I couldn't breathe anymore. The irony. The suffocation metaphor I'd later use to explain married women's behavior to their husbands. I understood it from the inside. The woman I'd started seeing, the one who triggered the divorce, was married herself. She had no interest in leaving her husband. None. She wanted the excitement, the connection, the breath of air I was talking about, but she wasn't about to blow up her family for it. Too much pain, too much disruption for the kids, too much financial risk. She wanted to keep the structure and add a secret room only she had the key to. The next one was the same, married, not leaving, just looking for something her life at home couldn't provide. The third woman was the most honest about it. Her name was Diane, and she laid it out over drinks at a hotel bar like she was negotiating a contract. "Here's how this works," she said, swirling a vodka tonic. "I expect 3 or 4 times a month. You cover the hotel and dinner if we go out. In return, you get to be as creative as you want. My husband is older and thinks sex is a 5-minute transaction. Get him going, lay there, let him do his thing. So surprise me." And I did. I surprised her. I surprised myself sometimes with the scenarios I engineered, the locations, the slow build of anticipation over text messages during the week that turned hotel check-in on a Friday afternoon into something electric. Diane gave me the best compliment I've ever received. We were lying in a tangle of hotel sheets, the air conditioning working overtime against the Florida heat, and she propped herself up on one elbow, looked at me with genuine curiosity, and said, "Have you ever thought about writing a book? A manual for boys on how to grow up to be better lovers?" I told her it wasn't complicated. "Just pay attention," I said. "Read the crowd," she laughed. "You make it sound so simple." "It is simple, it's just not easy." By the 5th married woman, I realized something that should have terrified me but instead felt like a discovery. The supply was essentially infinite. There is a moment in a long marriage, and it's different for every couple, but it exists where the equilibrium shifts. For years, the scale tips towards stability. Stay faithful, be the good wife, don't risk what you've built. But as the years accumulate, as the sex becomes routine, as the husband settles deeper into his recliner and his predictability, the other side of the scale starts gaining weight. The unexplored, the forbidden, the electric thrill of being wanted by someone new. At some tipping point, year 8, year 12, year 16, the scale tips the other way. Not for all women, not even for most. But for enough of them that a man who knows how to listen, who pays attention, who offers that breath of oxygen will never lack for company. And the husbands? The husbands were ghosts. I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean they were functionally invisible. The women and I would discuss their husbands the way you discuss a roommate you tolerate, with mild irritation and logistical concern. "What time does Rob usually get home?" "David's got that thing on Saturday, so I'm free until 4. They existed as scheduling obstacles, not as real people with beating hearts and wedding rings that matched the ones their wives still wore. After a while, we just forgot about them entirely. It was remarkable where we went, what we did, and never got caught. Restaurants, hotels, parks, even the occasional weekend trip with an elaborate cover story. Men in their 40s are staggeringly predictable. They come home at the same time, sit in the same chair, watch the same shows, go to bed at the same hour. They also don't think to ask why their wife suddenly started keeping her phone's location services turned on. I started to wonder if the husbands just didn't care. Maybe I thought they were grateful, nobody nagging them, nobody demanding attention. They could watch the game in peace, tinker with the old car in the garage, crack open a beer without a conversation about us or feelings. Everybody wins. My brother Jonathan didn't see it that way. John is 2 years older than me, built like a defensive end, and equipped with the kind of blunt moral clarity that comes from never having talked himself into anything stupid. He warned me constantly, relentlessly. The same way a smoke detector screams about the same fire over and over, you can take the batteries out, but the fire doesn't care. "One of these husbands is going to kill you," he'd say. We'd be on his back porch, beers in hand, the mosquitoes circling. "You understand that, right? You're not stealing cars, Aiden, you're stealing wives. That's the one thing men will kill over." I'd wave him off. "They don't know, they don't care. These women have their husbands figured out better than the FBI could. Trust me. Trust you." Jonathan would shake his head, that slow, deliberate shake that meant he was calculating how many different ways I was wrong. Famous last words, little brother. In the beginning, I listened enough to keep precautions. I had a 12-gauge shotgun leaning against the wall by my front door, a 9mm in the nightstand, just in case. But months passed, then years, and nothing happened. No confrontations, no threatening phone calls, no suspicious husbands showing up with questions. The women always reassured me. He would never. The worst he'd do is file for divorce. And after hearing that enough times from enough women, I believed it. I put the guns in the closet, then in the safe, then forgot the combination for a while. It's incredible how complacency works, like anesthesia. You don't feel it taking hold. One day you're cautious, checking your mirrors, varying your routines. The next day you're ordering room service under your real name and leaving your car parked in front of her favorite restaurant at lunchtime. Then came Ann Palmer. Even now, typing her name, something shifts in my chest. Not the surgical scar, though that shifts too when I breathe too deep. Something underneath it. We had 3 months together. 3 months that rewired my understanding of what I was actually looking for in all those years of borrowed wives and hotel rooms. Anne wasn't just intelligent, I'd been with intelligent women before. She was incandescent. The kind of mind that could dismantle your argument about trade policy and then pivot to a discussion of Elizabeth Bishop's poetry without taking a breath. She had this way of listening that made you feel like you were the only signal in a world of noise. And when she talked, when she really got going on something she cared about, her whole face transformed. Her eyes would widen and her hands would move, and she'd lean forward like she was about to tell you the secret of the universe. She was also married. 16 years, 2 boys, a husband named Steve who worked private security and spent his weekends at the shooting range. Anne ended it 4 months ago. She said Steve was getting suspicious, picking up on small changes in her routine, asking questions he'd never asked before, looking at her phone a half-second longer than casual. She said she needed to stop, to lay low, to protect her family. "I'll reach out when it's safe," she told me. That was the last full conversation we had. A few texts after that, short and careful, maintaining the thinnest thread of connection. Then silence. That one got to me. I hadn't dated since. Hadn't looked. Hadn't wanted to. For the first time in years, the pattern had broken, and in the empty space where the next affair should have been, there was just Anne's absence. Her voice on the phone at midnight. The way she'd read her poetry to me in bed, self-conscious and brave at the same time. The song we wrote together, her lyrics, my guitar, that would never be recorded or performed for anyone but us, but was, for one shining afternoon, the best thing either of us had ever made. I missed her the way you miss oxygen, slowly at first, then all at once. I told myself the husbands didn't care. I told myself the marriages were already dead and I was just the coroner signing the certificate. I told myself that what I offered these women was real, was valuable, was in some twisted way even noble. I was the one who saw them, who listened, who breathed life into the parts of themselves their husbands had left to wither. I told myself a lot of things, until one day when everything changed. I should tell you about the moment I knew something was fundamentally off with the story I'd been telling myself. Not the gunshot that came later and made the point with considerably more force. I mean the quieter moment. The one that happened in my own kitchen on an ordinary Tuesday night, 3 weeks after Anne went silent. I was making pasta. Nothing fancy, garlic, olive oil, whatever vegetables hadn't gone bad in the fridge. The kind of meal a man who lives alone makes when he's not trying to impress anyone. The house was quiet. I had a podcast playing, something about zero-day exploits and ransomware that I was half listening to for work. And then, for no particular reason, I stopped. Spatula in hand, water boiling, garlic starting to brown. I just stopped. I was thinking about Bob. Not Bob specifically, I didn't know anyone named Bob, but Bob was every husband. Bob was the composite character I'd built in my head over years of affairs. A faceless, harmless, vaguely pathetic figure who came home at 6:15, kissed his wife on the cheek, asked what was for dinner, and disappeared into the couch. Bob didn't read his wife's poetry. Bob didn't notice when she bought new lingerie. Bob didn't realize his wife was texting someone at 11:30 at night because Bob was already asleep, mouth open, sports center playing to no one. Bob was convenient. Bob was the justification. Because as long as the husband was Bob, generic, oblivious, emotionally absent, then what I was doing was almost a public service. I was filling a void that Bob created. I was the emergency oxygen mask that deployed when Bob let the cabin pressure drop. Standing in my kitchen, garlic burning now, I had a thought I'd been avoiding for years. What if Bob was a real person? What if Bob had a name and a face, and a history and fears and dreams of his own? What if Bob was doing his best with what he understood? What if Bob loved his wife deeply but had never been taught by his father, by the culture, by anyone? That love alone wasn't enough. What if Bob came home exhausted from a job he hated, trying to provide the security he'd been told his whole life was a man's primary obligation, and collapsed into that couch not because he didn't care but because he was spent? What if Bob found out? I turned off the burner, scraped the burned garlic into the trash, stood at the sink and looked out the window at my small, neat backyard where the deck chairs sat in the fading light. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time about the life I'd been living. Doubt. It passed. That's the thing about doubt: when it arrives without consequence, it dissipates like morning fog. By the time I ate my mediocre pasta and answered a few work emails, the feeling had faded back to wherever uncomfortable truths go when you're not ready to face them. Some basement of the mind, some locked room, but it had been there. And it had a name, and the name was Steve. I didn't know it yet, wouldn't know it for weeks. But the universe, or physics, or whatever force governs the intersection of choices and consequences, was already assembling the pieces. Let me tell you about the mechanics of an affair, not the emotional architecture. I've covered that. The actual logistics. Because people imagine affairs as this constant, breathless whirlwind of passion and secrecy, and the reality is far more mundane. An affair is a second job. It requires scheduling, communication protocols, contingency planning, and critically, pattern management. Every woman I was with had a rhythm at home, a schedule her husband could set his watch by, drop the kids at school by 7:45, grocery store on Tuesday mornings, book club every other Thursday. Gym 3 times a week, though the gym increasingly became wherever I was. The key to sustaining an affair isn't passion, it's fitting seamlessly into the existing pattern so that nothing looks different from the outside. The women were better at this than I was, miles better. They'd been managing complex household logistics for years, juggling school pickups, dentist appointments, soccer schedules, meal planning, playdates, in-law visits, and adding one more variable to the matrix was almost trivial. One of them told me, laughing, that scheduling our Wednesday afternoons was easier than coordinating her son's birthday party. Hotels were the backbone. I covered the cost always. A decent place, not a dump, not a palace. Something clean and anonymous where the staff didn't ask questions and the checkout was smooth. We'd develop favorites, places with late checkout, places with good room service for the mornings when the schedule allowed a long, lazy breakfast in bathrobes before she had to transform back into the other version of herself. The transformation was something to watch. I saw it happen dozens of times. A woman would arrive at the hotel looking like someone's suburban wife, practical clothes, minimal makeup, the slightly hurried expression of someone between errands. Within an hour, she was someone else entirely. The posture changed. The voice changed. The eyes changed. It wasn't an act, it was the opposite of an act. The wife and mother persona, I came to believe, was the performance. This, the woman laughing too loud, trying on a dress she'd never wear to the PTA meeting, talking about the novel she wanted to write or the country she wanted to visit, this was the real person. The one who'd been backstage for years, waiting for permission to step into the light. And when that woman emerged, the intimacy that followed was something most marriages never touch. Not because of technique, though that mattered, but because of the context. In the affair bubble, there was no judgment, no history of resentment, no mental inventory of who forgot to take out the trash last Thursday. No children sleeping down the hall, no pets that might scratch at the door, no mother-in-law coming for coffee in the morning. In the bubble, they could be anyone, do anything. Explore parts of themselves that the good girl architecture of their domestic lives had sealed behind brick and mortar. And once that seal broke, once they tasted that freedom, they came back for more, every time. It wasn't a fair fight, and I knew it. The husbands were competing against a version of their wives they'd never even met, in an arena they didn't know existed, under rules they couldn't see. And I was the one holding all the cards, no mortgage to argue about, no kids to exhaust me, no 15 years of accumulated grievances weighing down every interaction. I got to be the escape, the vacation. The fantasy made flesh. Of course I was winning. I was playing a different game entirely. The danger, obviously, was discovery. Early on, I treated it seriously. The shotgun by the door, Jonathan's warnings ringing in my ears, a level of operational security that bordered on professional burner phones, cash payments, never parking within 2 blocks of wherever we were meeting. But time does what time always does to fear. It erodes it, layer by layer like water wearing down stone. 6 months without incident becomes a year becomes 2, 2 becomes this is just how life works now. The shotgun migrated from the front door to the bedroom closet to the gun safe to a shelf in the garage behind a box of Christmas decorations. The women reinforced the complacency. Every one of them, when I'd raise the subject of danger, would wave it away with the same breezy confidence. You don't know Dave, he'd never. Mark would just file papers, he's too lazy for confrontation. Rick, please, Rick doesn't even notice when I get a haircut. And the data supported them. Nothing happened. No confrontations. No midnight phone calls heavy with breathing. No cars following me home. The husbands were exactly as predictable, exactly as oblivious, exactly as safely domesticated as their wives promised. Until the data changed. I need to tell you about one more thing before we get to the part where everything went sideways. The part about the affair bubble, the sex, because it matters to what happened next. And because pretending it doesn't exist would be dishonest, and I'm trying, for once, to be honest about all of it. The women I was with didn't come to me for gymnastic bedroom performances or some unrealistic physical specimen. I'm 5'11", reasonably fit for my age, with the kind of body that says goes to the gym but also enjoys beer. My equipment, as one particularly blunt woman put it, is standard issue. I don't say this out of false modesty. I say it because it matters, because the husbands who eventually find out always fixate on the physical, the way Steve would fixate on it later, staring at me with that baffled expression, and they miss the point entirely. What I offered wasn't physical superiority. It was attention, presence. The willingness to learn what each woman specifically wanted, and the patience to provide it without rushing toward my own finish line. I paid attention to breathing patterns, muscle tension, the small sounds that meant more of that versus less of that. I remembered what worked last time. I asked questions without making it clinical. And critically, I made the whole experience about her, her pleasure, her pace, her fantasies, in a way that years of routine marital sex had trained her not to expect. Was it also good for me? Of course. But the magic, if you can call it that, was in the investment. In treating her body and her pleasure as something worth studying with the same intensity I brought to a complex security system. That was the unfair advantage. Not my body, not my technique, my attention. And the fact that attention in a marriage flattened by routine becomes the rarest currency on earth. Anne understood this better than any of them. Anne, who came to me not for the sex, though the sex was extraordinary, but for the conversation, for the poetry. For the feeling that someone saw the summit she was climbing toward and believed she could reach it. Anne, who was right now somewhere in her life with Steve, laying low, being careful, trying to keep her family together while the memory of what we had slowly faded or didn't fade, and I had no way of knowing which. Anne, whose husband I'd reduced to a scheduling variable. A name mentioned in passing. A ghost. I didn't know Steve Palmer. Didn't want to. Didn't think about him as a person with a military short haircut and steroid-enhanced muscles and a rage problem that had already cost him his career in law enforcement. Didn't think about the .357 Magnum revolver he kept, the one with the model number printed right on the barrel, a detail I would later read with the focused clarity of a man staring at his own death. I didn't think about any of it. I was comfortable, complacent. The guns were put away. The smoke detector was screaming and I'd pulled the batteries and gone back to sleep. I told myself the husbands didn't care. I told myself no one gets hurt if no one finds out. I told myself that the longest streak of luck in the world is just the universe confirming that you've been right all along. And then it was Wednesday, a scorching August afternoon in Florida, and I was grilling a steak on my back deck. And the lightning was rolling in from the east the way it does every summer day like clockwork, and I didn't hear the car pull into my driveway. The steak was a reward. I'd pushed hard at the gym that morning, chest and back, an hour 15, the kind of session where the last set of pull-ups makes your arms feel like wet rope. By 2 in the afternoon, I was back home, showered, wearing gym shorts and nothing else because August in Florida is a personal insult from God. Or from whatever force runs the universe, since I don't believe in God. I believe in thermodynamics, and thermodynamics says Central Florida in August is 93 degrees with 91% humidity, which means the air doesn't move. It just sits on your skin like a warm, damp hand that won't let go. The steak was a nice ribeye from the butcher on Colonial, thick cut. I'd seasoned it an hour earlier and let it come to room temperature the way you're supposed to. Simple pleasure. A Wednesday afternoon treat for a man who lives alone and has learned to make small rituals out of ordinary days, because otherwise the days bleed together into one long, formless stretch of code and coffee and silence. I fired up the grill around 3:30. Lightning was already building to the east, those massive anvil-shaped thunderheads that stack up over the coast every summer afternoon like clockwork. You could hear the distant rumble, feel the barometric pressure dropping in your sinuses. The air smelled like ozone and cut grass and hot concrete. Standard August. Nothing unusual, nothing at all. I went inside to grab the plate with the steak and a pair of tongs. Checked my phone. A text from Jonathan. "What's for dinner? Thinking about swinging by." I typed back ribeye, "Bring beer," and set the phone on the counter. The steak went on the grill at 3:40. I could hear it sizzle even through the sliding glass door. I gave it 4 minutes, went out to flip it, came back inside, poured a glass of water, drank it standing at the kitchen sink watching the lightning get closer. The thunder was louder now, maybe 5 miles out. The light had that strange yellow-green quality it gets before a storm, like the whole sky is holding its breath. At 3:50, I stepped out onto the deck to pull the steak and kill the burner. And there was a man standing 3 feet from my grill, hoodie up, sunglasses, and a revolver pointed at my chest. My brain did something I've never experienced before or since. It split. One half went completely blank, white noise, static, the cognitive equivalent of a blue screen. The other half went into overdrive, processing details at a speed that felt almost mechanical. The gun, silver barrel, black grip, the printing on the side of the barrel, .357, I could read it clearly. A Magnum revolver, the kind of weapon that doesn't wound, it removes whatever it hits. The man was my height, my build maybe a little heavier. He held the gun with both hands at first, then shifted to one comfortable, practiced. He stood far enough away that lunging for it would be suicide. 3 feet is nothing in a conversation. It's a canyon when there's a firearm between you. He knew what he was doing, trained. "Can I turn off the grill?" My voice came out steadier than it had any right to. Some survival instinct, maybe. Some animal understanding that panic is contagious and calmness can be disarming. "Sure." His voice was flat, controlled. "Not that you'll ever use it again, though." I reached over slowly, turned the knob. The flame died with a soft click. The steak sat there, perfectly seared, releasing a thin ribbon of smoke into the humid air. Funny detail to notice when you might be about to die. The steak looked really good. My brain, the working half, was running calculations. Not a robbery. Robbers want your stuff, not your attention. They don't stand in your backyard in August wearing a hoodie and making conversation. This man wanted something specific, something personal. I didn't wait for instructions. I turned and walked inside, leaving the sliding door open behind me. I heard him follow. His footsteps were measured, deliberate. He didn't rush, didn't hesitate. He'd planned this. Inside, the air conditioning hit my bare chest, and I was suddenly aware of how exposed I was. Shorts, no shirt, no shoes, no weapon. The shotgun that used to lean against the wall by the front door was in the gun safe in the bedroom closet. The 9mm was in the nightstand drawer. They might as well have been on the moon. "Sit at the table." He gestured with the revolver toward the dining area, 4 chairs around a simple wooden table. My laptop was open on it, a half-finished security audit on the screen. I sat. He tossed something onto the table in front of me. Metal, heavy, handcuffs, not the toy kind. Not the fuzzy ones from a bachelorette party. These were real heavy-gauge steel, double-locking, the chain between the bracelets short and thick. They had scratches on them, wear marks. These had been used on actual human beings many times by someone who used them professionally. "Put those on, now." I picked them up. The metal was warm from his pocket. I ratcheted the first cuff around my left wrist. The click was loud in the quiet house, then awkwardly managed the second around my right. They were tight, professional tight. The kind of tight that says I know exactly how loose to leave them so you can't slip out. My options had just been cut in half, maybe worse than half. He pulled his hood back. The face underneath was weathered. Mid-40s, maybe, jaw set hard, eyes that hadn't blinked since I first saw him. But it was the haircut that confirmed what I already suspected. High and tight, military or law enforcement. The kind of cut you get every 2 weeks because it's regulation and you've been getting it so long you don't know how to stop. I decided to test. Look, you can see the valuables. I nodded toward the living room. Guitars, laptops, there's an Apple Watch in the bedroom. Take what you need and head out, no hard feelings, I won't call anyone. He glanced around. His eyes landed on the Stratocaster on its stand by the bookshelf. A vintage Sunburst, my favorite possession. I like the Strat, he said, and something shifted in his voice. A different register. Almost conversational. I may take that when I leave. A pause. I may also beat your dead body with it, haven't decided yet. The air conditioning hummed. Lightning flashed outside the sliding door, throwing a quick white rectangle across the tile floor. Thunder followed, closer now, maybe 2 miles. He moved through the house with his eyes, not his feet, checking sightlines. The hallway to the bedrooms, the bathroom door which was open, the kitchen visible from where he stood. He was confirming what he likely already knew. I lived alone, and right now I was alone. Then he turned back to me. His eyes locked onto mine and held. I've stared down difficult clients. I've sat across from FBI agents during security briefings without flinching. But this was different. This was a man deciding whether I deserved to keep breathing, and he hadn't made up his mind yet. I held the stare. Don't show fear. That was the only strategy I had. There is no manual for this. No YouTube tutorial, no Reddit thread, no engineering framework for what to do when a man with a gun and nothing to lose is measuring your life against whatever wrong you've done to him. 2 minutes. Maybe 3, it felt like the length of a season. Stand up, asshole. I stood. The handcuffs clinked against the table edge. My name is Aiden, I said, just so you know. The eyes didn't change. The gun didn't waver. I know your name, asshole. I know your age. I know your parents' names. I know where you work, your social security number, your credit score. I know everything about you. He took a step closer. Now drop your shorts. Excuse me? You heard me. Drop them now. He motioned downward with the barrel, casual, like he was asking me to pass the salt. Look, you can have every piece of electronics in this house, the guitars, the truck in the driveway, but not, I have absolutely no problem putting a round through your kneecap first. Then we'll see how fast you comply. Shorts, now. I was wearing gym shorts with an elastic waistband. With the cuffs on, getting them down was an awkward, graceless operation. Thumbs hooked in the waistband, shimmy them past the hips, let gravity do the rest. They pooled around my ankles. Underwear, too. A flash of Kevin Spacey in American Beauty shot through my mind. The neighbor. The ex-Marine, the closeted rage that ended in a gunshot. I thought, this is it. This is how it happens, some twisted motive I never saw coming. I worked the boxer briefs down. Now I was standing in my own dining room, handcuffed, barefoot, naked from the waist down, with a .357 pointed at my chest. The air conditioning hit places air conditioning shouldn't hit. I resisted the primal, idiotic urge to cover myself. He looked down, stared for a long, clinical moment, then looked back up at my face. It's not that impressive. There was genuine confusion in his voice. Disappointment, even, like he'd been expecting to find the answer to a question that had been tearing him apart and instead found nothing. Well, I said, and I still can't believe these words came out of my mouth at what could have been the final minute of my life. There is zero blood flow to it right now, so you're not exactly seeing the marketing version. He didn't laugh, didn't even register the joke. His eyes stayed fixed on mine, and now I could see something behind the rage, something worse than rage, bewilderment. I don't get it, he said, more to himself than to me. His gun hand dropped an inch, then corrected. You're no taller than me, not more muscular, your equipment is about the same. He shook his head slowly. Why would she do this? I don't get it. And just like that, every alarm in my brain went off at once. Not a robbery, not a random psycho, not a home invasion, a husband. The light bulbs fired in sequence. The law enforcement haircut, the professional handcuffs, the fact that he'd done surveillance on me, knew my schedule, my family, my social security number. He hadn't broken in angry and sloppy. He'd planned this with the meticulous patience of a man who investigates crimes for a living, or used to. And the question, that broken, bewildered, why would she do this, narrowed the field to one person, one woman. The only one whose husband might have the skills, the access, and the fury to show up at my house with a magnum and a pair of department-tissued handcuffs. "I'm going to go out on a limb here," I said slowly, "and guess your name is Steve." His face changed. The mask of control slipped for just a fraction of a second, and underneath it was something raw, something wounded. He recovered fast, but I'd seen it. The confirmation was in the half-second before the mask came back. "Very good, asshole. I'm going to go out on the same limb and say you've been sleeping with my wife." He stepped closer. "If you know my name, then you knew she was married. And that didn't seem to bother you." "Again, it's Aiden, and past tense. I did have a relationship with Anne. I haven't seen her in months." I kept my voice even. Factual. No denial, no excuse, no begging. I figured if this man had gone through the trouble of confirming everything about my life down to a 9-digit federal identifier, then lying to him would be the fastest route to a bullet. Something shifted in his posture. Not relaxation, he was nowhere near relaxed, but a recalibration, like a predator reassessing prey that didn't behave the way prey is supposed to behave. "I'll give you credit, Aiden." First time he used my name, it landed like a concession. "You're not trying to deny it, not lying through your teeth, and you're not groveling or begging me not to kill you." "Would it help if I did?" "No. Then I won't waste your time or mine. You've done your homework, Steve. You're law enforcement, or were. You have access to resources most people don't. You already know the facts. Lying to you would just insult both of us." The gun stayed pointed at my center mass. His finger was beside the trigger, not on it. A trained habit. That was good. That meant some part of his discipline was still operational, the part that hadn't completely surrendered to whatever was driving this. "Since you haven't pulled the trigger yet," I continued, "I'm guessing you want something more than just to kill me. You want to understand why." He stared at me for a long time. The thunder rolled outside, closer now, maybe right overhead. The lights flickered once held. "I was married to Anne for 16 years. His voice was quieter now, still hard, but the volume had dropped, which meant something was opening. "She never once said she was unhappy, not one time. How were you able to convince her to risk everything? She knew I'd divorce her. Our kids are still home." He looked at me, all of me, the pathetic picture of a half-naked man in handcuffs, and the bewilderment came back. "You're really not all that, Aiden, so yes." He steadied the gun. "Please, enlighten me." "This might take a while," I said. "There's beer in the cooler by the fridge, and since this could be my last one, would you mind grabbing me one too?" He considered this for a beat. The absurdity of the request hanging between us. Two men, one armed, one half-naked and handcuffed, about to crack beers in a dining room during a thunderstorm. Steve walked to the kitchen, keeping me in his peripheral vision the whole time. He pulled 2 bottles from the small cooler. I'd stocked it that morning for Jonathan's visit. He set one on the table in front of me and opened his own with his free hand, the gun resting against his thigh now instead of pointed at my chest. A slight improvement, not much. I picked up the bottle with both cuffed hands, took a long sip, cold, clean, the best beer I'd ever tasted because it might literally be the last thing I tasted on Earth. "Question for you first, Steve." I set the bottle down carefully. "Do you think that's what this was about? Why Anne would risk everything? You think it was about sex? Isn't that the definition of an affair?" His brow furrowed. "Sex outside the marriage. Technically, yes, but it's not the only reason, and I can tell you for certain it wasn't the main reason Anne came to me." I let that sit for a second. "For the record, she found me, not the other way around. She was looking for someone like me. I just happened to be there. So tell me about this amazing relationship." The sarcasm was thick enough to cut. "What was happening at home that was so terrible she needed to find you? You tell me, how were things between you two over the last year or so, in your honest opinion?" Steve took a drink. Adjusted the gun on his thigh, thought about it. "They were fine," he said. "We were in a groove, the boys had their activities, I'd left the department, joined a private security outfit. Good money, better hours, we were finally getting out of debt." He paused. "Not a lot of time for intimacy, but at 16 years and 2 kids, that's normal. When we did, it was good. She seemed satisfied." "What did you guys do for fun? Just the 2 of you?" "We had some couple friends we'd see once a month. The boys' games on weekends, we'd hang with the other parents. Normal stuff." He straightened. "And don't tell me we were boring. I know where you're going with this. We were like every other couple at that stage." I'm positive none of those other women in our circle were. You'd be surprised about some of those soccer moms, Steve. His jaw tightened. Anne never said she was bored. She never said anything was wrong. They never do. I shook my head. That's the part that confuses me too, honestly. It's like they can't bring themselves to disrupt the rhythm. They don't want to be the one who names the problem, so the problem just grows. Steve said nothing, waited. I'm going to tell you what I know from long conversations with Anne. Please try not to shoot me yet. I took another sip. Your wife was one of the most remarkable people I've ever met. I mean that without exaggeration. She was brilliant, not just book smart, but intuitive. She had this hunger for knowledge, for conversation, for ideas. She was deeply creative. Steve, did you know she wrote poetry? Yeah, he said it fast, dismissive. She used to show me I'm not into that stuff. I told her I didn't really get it. She stopped showing me eventually. A shrug. I'm a cop, not some literary type. I hung my head. Actually hung it chin to chest and let out a long breath. Do you realize how insulting that was to her? I was being honest. You were telling her that the thing she cared about most in the world, the creative expression of her innermost self, was worthless to you. That's what she heard, Steve, every time. His jaw worked. The gun hand twitched. She loved going shooting with you, right? I asked. Yeah, she'd come to the range, getting pretty decent, actually. Only wanted to shoot the .22, but she hated it. Silence. She went because you loved it, because she wanted to support your thing. She showed up at the range every weekend and touched a weapon she had no interest in touching because it mattered to you. And she hoped, she told me this, that you'd return the favor. Read one of her poems, ask about the one she was working on, sit on the couch for 20 minutes while she read you something she'd written. That's all she wanted. Steve's eyes had changed. The rage was still there, but something else was crowding in alongside it. I read her poetry, I said quietly. A lot of it. And I got her to write lyrics for a song. I played guitar, she wrote the words, and we recorded it on my phone one afternoon. It was never going to be on the radio. It was never going to leave that room. But Steve, you should have seen her face when I played it back. She lit up like I'd handed her the whole world. He looked away. First time since he'd entered the house that his eyes left mine. Let me try to explain something. Have you heard of Maslow's hierarchy? No. It's a psychological model. Picture a triangle, wide base at the bottom, narrow peak at the top. 5 levels. The bottom level is the basics: food, shelter, physical safety. Above that is security and stability. Level 3 is love, family, intimacy, belonging. Level 4 is self-esteem, respect, recognition. And at the very top, the peak, the summit, is self-actualization. That's creativity, purpose, reaching your full potential, becoming who you were meant to be. I watched his face to see if this was landing. It was. Most people spend their lives somewhere in the middle. Level 3 is where marriage lives, family, connection. And that's good, that's important. But Anne wasn't built for the middle, Steve. She was wired for the top. She wanted the summit. She wanted to create, to learn, to grow, to become something beyond wife and mother, not instead of those things, but in addition to them. I paused, let the thunder fill the silence. She told me that as the years went on, as the routine calcified, as you settled into the groove you described, she didn't just stall at level 3. She felt herself sliding backward, toward the base, toward just existing, just surviving the days. She wrote a poem about it, actually, used MT, Everest as the metaphor, climbing toward the summit but never getting past base camp. And then feeling the mountain push her back down. Steve's beer sat untouched now. His hand on the gun had gone still. We met at a Starbucks, I said. She started talking to me about a book I was reading. We talked for an hour. She had to run, pick up the boys from practice. I told her it was the most stimulating conversation I'd had in a long time. She asked if I came there often. I said I could for the right company. Smooth, bitter, maybe, but here's the thing, it wasn't my body she was looking for that day. It wasn't my face or my charm or my bank account. She saw someone who wanted to talk about ideas, someone who'd engage with her mind. She saw a path back to the summit. And the sex, Steve's voice had gone rough. Who started it? Who made the first move? She was hesitant for weeks. We just talked. Starbucks twice a week. I let her set the pace. Then one day she showed up furious about something. She wouldn't tell me what, but she was angry at you specifically. She said 2 words I won't repeat, and that was it. The line was crossed. What 2 words? I hesitated. He raised the gun slightly. She said, screw him. And then she kissed me. Steve's breathing had changed. Deeper, slower. the controlled breathing of a man keeping himself in check by force of will. Here's where it gets unfair, Steve, and I mean that. Once she was out of the house, away from the bedroom where the boys jump in on Saturday mornings, away from the kitchen where your mom has coffee, away from every room that has rules attached to it, she was a different person. Not a fake person. The real one. The one she couldn't be at home because home had a dress code she never agreed to but couldn't figure out how to take off. "What did she do?" he asked, barely above a whisper now. "With you, what was she willing to do?" Nothing extreme. She was open, experimental, curious. She wanted to try things she'd never felt safe trying at home. That's the gap, Steve. It's not a fair fight between a husband and an affair partner. You're carrying 16 years of context into every interaction. I walked in with zero baggage. I looked at the cuffs on my wrists, thought about what I was about to say, said it anyway. She did enjoy being in control, though. Funny enough, these handcuffs look familiar. That was a mistake. His face went dark. The gun came back up to center mass. The muscle in his jaw pulsed like a heartbeat. "Steve, I'm sorry. That was stupid. I shouldn't have said that." He didn't respond. Just stared at me with an expression that was somewhere between murder and grief. "Listen to me," I said. "I know it's too late for this, but I need to say it. I am sorry for all of it. What I did was selfish and destructive, and I knew it was wrong from the beginning. I rationalized it. I told myself stories about how the marriages were already dead, how I was doing them a favor, how the husbands didn't care. And all of that was garbage. I know that now. You're right about one thing." His voice was cold again, controlled. "It is too late." He took a step forward. "I don't know if you're actually sorry or if this is just another survival tactic. But either way, it doesn't change what you did." His volume rose on the last words. "You stole her from me?" The crack in his composure opened wide, just for a second. I saw what was underneath the rage, underneath the training, underneath the .357 Magnum and the handcuffs and the hoodie in August. A man who loved his wife and lost her and couldn't understand why. The thunder had moved directly overhead now. Every flash lit the room in white, and the crashes that followed shook the windows in their frames. The rain started, hard, sudden, the way Florida rain always starts, like someone turned a faucet on full. Steve was pacing, short, tight laps between the dining table and the kitchen counter. The gun moved with him, sometimes pointed at me, sometimes at the floor. His composure was fraying. I could see it in the way his free hand kept opening and closing, the way his breathing had gone shallow and fast. "Steve," I said carefully. "Does Ann know you're here?" He stopped pacing, looked at me. "Not exactly." Something cold dropped through my chest, not the air conditioning. Something deeper. "What does not exactly mean? Where is she right now?" He tilted his head, almost playful, the way a cat looks at something it's already killed. "She's out in my car." "Tell me she's just sitting there, listening to the radio, reading something on her phone." He laughed, not a real laugh. A sound that came from somewhere broken inside him, high, thin, jagged at the edges. The laugh of a man who'd crossed a line so far back he couldn't see it anymore. "Not much light in the trunk for reading," he said, "even if the tape came loose." The cold thing in my chest turned to ice, spread outward, through my ribs, my arms, my hands. I could feel my heartbeat in the handcuffs. "Is she alive?" My voice cracked. First time since this started that the composure broke. "Steve." "Is she still alive?" "She was when I wrapped her up." He said it matter-of-factly, the way you describe packing a suitcase. "She was sleeping a little after the punch, but breathing. Wrapped her in plastic to keep the car clean." The room tilted. Not physically, I was still sitting in the same chair, same table, same house. But the reality of what was happening expanded suddenly, violently, like a lens pulling back to reveal a landscape I hadn't known I was standing in. This wasn't just about me. This had never been just about me. Ann was in the trunk of his car, beaten, bound, wrapped in plastic, in August, in Florida, where the inside of a parked car reaches 140 degrees in 20 minutes. And the gallon of fuel, he'd mentioned, no, he hadn't mentioned that yet, but I could see it now in the casual horror of his logistics, the careful planning of a man who intended to leave no loose ends. "Steve," I leaned forward, the cuffs scraped the table. "This isn't how it has to go. Listen to me. You can still stop this. Pick up the phone, call 911, tell them where she is. Then take my truck. The keys are on the hook by the front door. Drive wherever you want. Mexico, Costa Rica, I have cash in my bedroom safe. I'll give you the combination. Just let her live." He wasn't listening. His eyes had gone somewhere else, somewhere internal and unreachable. Think about the boys, Steve, your sons. Whatever happens to me, whatever happens between you and Anne, they need their mother. They need her alive. The boys. He repeated it like a word from a foreign language, something he recognized but couldn't quite translate. Yes, the boys. This morning they had a mother who was alive and a father who wasn't in prison. You can still give them one of those things. Please, just walk away. The maniacal laugh came back, louder this time, bouncing off the tile and the bare walls and the sliding glass door streaked with rain. Then it stopped. Suddenly, like a switch had been flipped, and what replaced it was worse. Calm, total, absolute calm settled over Steve's face. His breathing evened out. His hands stopped trembling. His eyes focused with a clarity that I recognized from my own professional life. The look of someone who has finished debugging, who has identified the solution, who has decided. I did not like this calm. Aiden, he used my name, second time. I want to thank you for enlightening me, really. Thank you for explaining how my wife's affair is actually my fault. That's just wonderful insight. That's not what I wish I'd had this information a year ago, 5 years ago. Maybe things would have been different. Maybe I would have read her poetry. He almost smiled. Maybe I would have written her a song. He was quiet for a moment. Rain hammered the deck outside. I really loved her, he said, almost to himself. I know you don't believe that, but I did. I just didn't know how to show it the way she needed. And now it doesn't matter because I've broken everything. I put my hands on her this morning. I put her in a trunk. I drove to a stranger's house with a gun. There's no version of this where I go home and coach Little League on Saturday. There's a version where she lives, Steve, where the boys still have a mother. That version exists right now. You just have to choose it. I can't undo what I already did. You can stop making it worse. He looked at me with something that in a different context might have been gratitude or resignation or the exhausted peace of a man who has finally stopped fighting himself. You really do pay attention, don't you? He said quietly. I can see why she liked you. Then his face closed, like a door shutting. So long, asshole Aiden. The gun came up, level with my chest. His finger moved from the guard to the trigger. I saw it happen in slow motion, the tiny mechanical shift that separates intention from action, life from death. I didn't close my eyes. I don't know why. Some stupid, stubborn part of me wanted to see it coming. The sound of the first shot was enormous, louder than the thunder, louder than anything I'd heard in my life. A physical force, not just sound but concussion pressure, a wall of noise that compressed the air in the room. Then a second shot, almost simultaneously. Not a millisecond after the first, but close, so close that my brain registered them as a single event that had somehow split in two. The timing was wrong. If Steve had fired once and hit me, there was no reason for a second shot that fast. Unless it came from a different gun. Something hit me, left side of my chest. Not pain, not yet. Pain takes a moment to arrive, like sound after lightning. What I felt first was impact, like being punched by something impossibly fast and impossibly dense. My chair tipped. I went backward. The ceiling fan appeared above me, still spinning its lazy circles. Then noise, so much noise, yelling. A voice I thought I recognized but couldn't place. More yelling, someone very close, saying words I couldn't separate from the ringing in my ears. The ceiling fan was still spinning. I watched it go around. One rotation, two, something warm and wet was spreading across my left side. The air conditioning was very cold on my bare legs. My hands were still cuffed. The metal was pressing into my back where I'd landed on them. I had a thought, clear as a bell, cutting through the static and the noise and the warm, wet spreading. Anne. She's in the trunk. I tried to say it. I don't know if words came out or just sound. Find Anne. She's in the trunk of his car. Then the ceiling fan started to slow, which was wrong. It was electric. It didn't slow down, except it did. The blades stretched and blurred, and the light above it got brighter, then dimmer, then brighter again. Then everything went cold. And then there was nothing at all. Bright light. That was the first thing, not warm light, not soft light. Bright, aggressive, clinical light, the kind that doesn't care if you're ready for it. It punched through my eyelids and I thought, with the calm certainty of a man who has just been shot in the chest, I was wrong about everything. No God, no afterlife. That had been the operating assumption for 36 years. And now here I was, floating toward a light, which meant either the Christians had a point or I was having the most cliched near-death experience in medical history. I should have gone to church, just once, just to hedge the bet. The light faded, came back, faded again. Sounds drifted in and out like radio stations on a long highway, beeping, steady and rhythmic. A hissing sound. Voices, but muffled like people talking in the next room through a thick wall. I tried to focus on any of it and couldn't. My brain was a browser with 40 tabs open and no RAM left to run any of them. Something smelled like plastic and rubbing alcohol. Something else smelled metallic, coppery, faintly sweet. I'd later learn that was my own blood, but in the moment it was just another data point my brain couldn't process. Black again, then light, then black. This repeated I have no idea how many times. Could have been hours, could have been days. Each cycle the light got a little more stable. The sounds got a little sharper. The beeping resolved into a heart monitor. The hissing became an oxygen line, and the voices became one voice, steady and close. Mr. Atkins, can you hear me, Mr. Atkins? I became aware that I was a Mr. Atkins. That seemed like useful information. I tried to open my eyes. The lids weighed approximately 40 pounds each. I got them halfway and the room rushed in, blurred, overexposed, slowly sharpening. A face above me, brown skin. Dark eyes behind glasses, a surgical cap still on, blue, slightly askew. I tried to speak. Something was in my throat, a tube, hard plastic, blocking my vocal cords. The words came out as a wet mumble, barely human. Tell me you're not an angel. She heard it somehow. Or enough of it. She laughed, a real laugh, surprised and delighted, the kind that crinkles the corners of the eyes. No, Mr. Atkins, I'm your ER surgeon. Welcome back among the living. The room was coming into focus now. Machines, IV lines, 2 of them, 1 in each arm, a bank of monitors on my left, all showing numbers and waveforms I couldn't read. People in scrubs. 4, maybe 5 of them, arrayed around the bed at various distances, watching me the way you watch a soufflé through the oven window, hopeful but not yet committed. I got shot. It wasn't a question. The memory was coming back in fragments, the deck, the hoodie, the .357, the conversation, the beer, the trunk, the sound. Yes. 1 round, left side of your chest. It punctured your lung and fractured your 4th rib, but that rib deflected the bullet just enough to miss your aorta by about 2 centimeters. She held up her thumb and forefinger, almost touching. 2 centimeters, Mr. Atkins. You are a spectacularly lucky man. If you call a bullet hole in your chest lucky, I'll have to take your word for it. You're the one with the medical degree. She studied the monitors, checked something on a tablet. Then she turned back with a small, satisfied nod. Blood pressure stabilizing, oxygen levels acceptable, sarcasm apparently undamaged. She looked at the team around her. I'm going to call this one a win, yay me. Quiet laughter from the scrubs. Someone clapped once. The next day, or what they told me was the next day, Dr. Gupta returned and oversaw the removal of the breathing tube. This was not the gentle, cinematic moment you might imagine. It was a long plastic tube being extracted from deep inside my trachea, and it felt exactly as unpleasant as that sounds. But the first sip of water afterward, room temperature from a plastic cup with a bendy straw, was the finest drink of my life. Champagne on New Year's, cold beer on a boat, nothing compared. The chest tube came next. That one drained the fluid from the cavity where the bullet had scrambled my insides. Removing it was worse than getting shot. I'm not exaggerating. The bullet was one instant of shock. The chest tube was a sustained, grinding extraction that made me grip the bed rails until my knuckles went white, and I said a word that made one of the nurses raise an eyebrow. When the worst of it passed, and I was lying there sweating and shaking and alive, I remembered something that cut through the physical pain like a blade. The woman, I said. Anne. Anne Palmer, was she, is she? Dr. Gupta's expression shifted, professional, measured. She was transported to St. Mary's, a different facility. I don't have direct information on her condition. She paused. But I can tell you there's been some talk among the staff about how you may have saved her life. The details aren't mine to share. You'll want to speak with Detective Burns. He's been waiting for you to be well enough for a conversation. Burns, the detective assigned to your case, I'll let him know you're coherent. She started toward the door, then turned back. It's Dr. Gupta, by the way, for the record. I think I like Dr. Angel better, she smiled. You can call me that if you wish, but only because you got shot. That privilege expires when you're discharged. She left to continue saving other people who probably also didn't appreciate how fragile the distance was between being alive and not being alive. I lay there staring at the ceiling tiles. counting the holes in them, trying not to think about Anne in a trunk wrapped in plastic in August heat. Trying not to calculate how long she could have survived like that. Trying and failing. A knock on the door frame. A man in a sport coat, no tie, carrying a small notepad that looked identical to every detective's notepad in every cop show ever made. "Mr. Atkins, good morning, I'm Detective Burns. How are you feeling?" The answers were coming. I wasn't sure I was ready for them. "Feeling like a man with a hole in his chest, detective, but I'm told that's an improvement." Burns pulled a chair to the side of my bed and sat without being invited. He was mid-50s, maybe, compact build. The kind of calm that comes from decades of sitting across from people on the worst day of their lives. He opened the notepad, uncapped a pen, and looked at me with an expression that managed to be both patient and expectant. "I understand you have questions," he said. "I do too. How about we trade? You first. What happened after I searched for the right word? After I went down?" Burns set the pen on the notepad, the giving information posture, not the taking information posture. "A Steve Palmer was found deceased in your home, single gunshot wound to the head. The round that hit you was fired from his weapon, a .357 Magnum revolver. The round that killed Mr. Palmer was a different caliber, 9mm, fired by a Jonathan Atkins." The room went very quiet, just the heart monitor beeping steady. "My brother. Your brother. He arrived at your residence apparently to join you for dinner. He noticed an unfamiliar vehicle in the driveway with the driver's door ajar and a shotgun visible in the passenger seat. He retrieved his own firearm from his vehicle, a Glock 19, and entered the house. He came in just as Mr. Palmer fired at you. Your brother returned fire immediately. Mr. Palmer was dead before he hit the floor." I stared at the ceiling. Jonathan, coming over for a steak and a beer, finding a car that didn't belong there. Grabbing his gun, the gun he always carried, the gun I'd teased him about for years, the gun that existed because he believed a danger I'd long since dismissed. "Is he okay?" "He's fine. Shaken, obviously, but fine. He's been asked to wait until I speak with you before visiting." Burns picked up the pen again. "My turn. Did you know Steve Palmer?" "No, never met him before that afternoon." "Did you know his wife, Ann Palmer?" I let a beat pass. The heart monitor beeped twice. "Yes, Ann and I were friends." Burns didn't write anything, just waited. He'd done this enough times to know that insufficient answers tend to expand on their own if you give them room. "We were in a relationship," I said. "A romantic relationship. It ended several months ago. I hadn't seen her since. Even though she was married. Even though she was married. Yes, I knew." He wrote that down, neat, small handwriting. I noticed he held the pen differently from how most people hold pens, further up the barrel like a draftsman. "How long was Mr. Palmer in your house before the shooting?" "Hard to say exactly. Time gets strange when someone's pointing a gun at you. I'd guess 45 minutes. "That's a long time for a confrontation. What happened during those 45 minutes?" "We talked mostly. He wanted to understand why. Why Ann would." I let it trail off. "He also made me drop my pants." Burns looked up from the notepad, one eyebrow raised slightly. "He wanted to see if I had some physical advantage over him. I didn't. That confused him even more, so I tried to explain what I understood about the situation, about Ann, about what she needed that she wasn't getting at home." "And how did you frame that?" "I talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the levels of human fulfillment." How Ann was stuck at, Burns' pen stopped moving, a small, almost imperceptible shift at the corner of his mouth. "You explained Maslow's hierarchy to Steve Palmer?" "I did. While he was holding a gun on you. The beer helped." The almost smile became an actual smile, brief, controlled, but real. "Master's in Psychology, University of Central Florida," Burns said. "Minor in Criminology. And I worked with Steve a few years back before he was let go from the department. He was a good patrol officer, thorough, dependable, but he came up through the ranks on discipline, not insight, so I'm just a bit amused imagining that conversation." "He was let go?" Burns leaned back. "Excessive force incident. A teenager during a traffic stop got mouthy. Steve put him in the hospital. The investigation revealed he'd been using anabolic steroids, originally prescribed for a shoulder injury, but he'd continued well past the medical need. Liked what they did for his physique. They also did things to his impulse control. Steroids. That explained the volatility I'd seen, the way Steve could shift from calm to maniacal and back in seconds." a temperament already under pressure, chemically destabilized. After the department let him go, he joined a private security company, Burns continued. Same kind of man, provide and protect, that's the box he lived in. Burns looked at his notes, then back at me. Now, about Ms. Palmer. He watched my face. What do you know about her current situation? Steve said she was in the trunk of his car, wrapped in plastic. He said he'd hit her. He said she was unconscious. I could hear my own voice thinning. Please tell me she's alive. She's alive. 2 words. I felt my whole body release something it had been holding since I woke up. My eyes burned. I pressed my palms against them, both hands, the IV line tugging, and just breathed. Steve confronted her that morning, Burns said, his voice level, clinical. He had evidence of the affair, we're still determining how he obtained it. The confrontation became physical. He struck her multiple times. He wrapped her in plastic sheeting and sealed her mouth with packing tape. He placed her in the trunk of his vehicle along with a 1-gallon container of gasoline. Gasoline. The air left my lungs. We believe his intent was to set the vehicle on fire with her inside, after dealing with you. The heart monitor was beeping faster now. A nurse glanced in from the hallway. She was found in time, Burns said firmly, anchoring me. She was still bleeding from the facial injuries and her breathing was compromised from the tape, but she was conscious when the paramedics reached her. She's been treated. She's recovering. Physically, she's going to be fine. And not physically? That's going to take longer. She's working with professionals. But I can tell you that her condition improved noticeably when she was informed that you were going to survive. I didn't trust my voice, so I just nodded. The reason she was found in time, Mr. Atkins, is you. Your brother says that the last thing you said before losing consciousness was "Find Anne. She's in the trunk of his car." He relayed that to the first responders. They reached her within minutes. I didn't remember saying it. I remembered thinking it, the ceiling fan, the cold, but the words getting from my brain to my mouth, that part was gone. Some circuit firing on backup power, saying the one thing that mattered before the system went dark. Burns flipped a page. Your brother has been fully cleared. The shooting has been ruled justified. The press has been enthusiastic about his role. He's handled the attention with what I describe as considerable enjoyment. That sounded right, Jonathan with a microphone and a hero story. His hat size was going to be a problem. Burns capped his pen, closed the notepad, then he did something unexpected. He set both items on the bedside table and just looked at me, not as a detective. As a person, I'm married, Mr. Atkins, 9 years, 1 daughter. He paused. My wife teaches elementary school. She paints watercolors on the weekends. She's terrible at it, honestly, but she loves it. I bought her a studio light last Christmas so she could paint at night after our daughter goes to sleep. I wasn't sure where this was going, but I listened. I asked you earlier how you framed your conversation with Steve. Maslow, the summit. He stood, picked up his notepad. She means the world to me, Mr. Atkins. Why would I not help her reach it? He straightened his jacket. One more thing, professional advice, not legal. I see cases like this more than I'd like. The jealous spouse, the affair partner. The violence that everyone thought was impossible until it wasn't. I'd strongly suggest rethinking your strategy of dating married women. He paused at the door. It's clearly not good for your health. Then he was gone. And I was alone with a heart monitor and a ceiling I'd memorized and the full, crushing weight of everything I'd set in motion. We think we're so smart. We think we've figured it all out. We feel justified, entitled, protected by our rationalizations like their body armor. But physics doesn't care about rationalizations. Action and reaction. Every force produces an equal and opposite force. I'd pushed against the structure of other people's lives for years, and the structure had finally pushed back, with a .357 Magnum and a gallon of gasoline. Never again, Atkins, never again. I heard him before I saw him. Hey, dumbass, look at you walking to the bathroom like a real person. No more peeing in a pitcher. Jonathan filled the doorway with that grin, the one that simultaneously communicated deep affection and complete refusal to take anything seriously. He was wearing a clean shirt, which meant he'd dressed up for the occasion. Jonathan's version of formal. The nurse, a woman named Rita who had maintained perfect professional composure through every tube removal, every dressing change, and every complaint I'd lodged about the food, was helping me back from the bathroom. She looked at Jonathan the way you look at a golden retriever that just knocked over a lamp. You must be the brother. The better-looking brother, yes. I reached out for a hug and immediately realized that was impossible. Chest bandage, IV lines, a body that screamed in protest at any movement more ambitious than breathing. Fist bump, Rita said. That's what we're working with for a while. We bumped fists. His was twice the size of mine, which it always had been. Do I even need to say it? Jonathan said, settling into the chair Burns had used earlier. No, you don't. How many times did I tell you? More than I deserved and fewer than I needed. He laughed, but the laugh didn't quite make it to his eyes. Up close under the bravado, I could see it, the residue of what he'd walked into. A tightness around his jaw, a flicker in his gaze when he looked at the bandage on my chest. My brother had killed a man to save my life, and no amount of wisecracks was going to make that a simple thing to carry. John, thank you. You're welcome, baby bro. You owe me approximately 900 dinners. I accept steak. Tell me what happened, from your side. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. I pulled into your driveway, thinking about nothing more complicated than ribeye and cold beer. There was a car I didn't recognize, dark sedan. The driver's door was open a few inches, like somebody left in a hurry, and there was a shotgun sitting in the passenger seat, just sitting there, in plain view. He paused, rubbed his hands together. My brain did that thing where it puts two and two together before you're ready for the answer. Strange car plus visible weapon plus everything I've been telling you for years equals I go back to my truck and get my Glock. I came through your front door, which was unlocked. Heard you and someone else in the dining area. His voice got quieter. Not softer, quieter. Like the volume was being controlled by something other than choice. I came around the corner and this guy was standing over you with a revolver. He fired, I saw you go backward, and he stopped, swallowed. I shot him. He was turning toward me when I pulled the trigger. One round. He dropped right there on the tile. Rita had stopped pretending to check the monitors and was standing still, listening. I knew he was gone before he hit the ground. Then I was on my knees next to you. You were bleeding bad, Aiden, real bad, but you were still in there. Your eyes were open, kind of. And you said you grabbed my arm with those cuffs still on, and you said, "Find Anne. She's in the trunk of his car." His voice cracked on the last word. Just barely. He covered it with a cough. I called 911, grabbed every towel in your kitchen and packed them against the hole in your chest. Then I heard the sirens. There was a unit already close by, some kind of false alarm they were coming back from. They were there in maybe 2 minutes. I left you with the paramedics and went through the dead guy's pockets for his car keys, popped the trunk. He went quiet for a moment. There was a woman in there, Aiden, wrapped up in that industrial plastic, tape over her mouth, and a red gas can sitting right next to her, in August, in a closed trunk. He looked at his hands. I pulled the tape off. She was breathing, but barely. Her face was, he'd hurt her pretty bad. The second ambulance was pulling in and I just screamed at them to get over here. They took her. They took you. And then it was just me standing in your driveway with 2 ambulances leaving and a dead man on your dining room floor. He leaned back in the chair, blew out a long breath. Those EMTs, by the way. Those people who show up and just do the thing while everything around them is chaos. They were unbelievable, like a machine. Calm, fast, no wasted motion. I need to write somebody a letter or something. You talked to Anne? At the hospital, St. Mary's. I'd never met her, just knew of her from your terrible decision-making. She was banged up but coherent. She asked me about 900 questions about you. How bad was it? Were you awake? What did you say? Did you ask about her? He shook his head. She's seeing a couple of therapists, working through it. She's tough, Aiden, I'll give her that. Mom and Dad, losing their minds from 800 miles away. Mom has called me 14 times. Dad called twice, which for Dad is the equivalent of a full nervous breakdown. They wanted to fly down, but I convinced them to wait until you could actually have a conversation without a tube in your throat. We sat there for a minute. The monitors beeped. The air conditioning hummed. Outside the window I didn't have, the world was apparently still functioning. The press has been fun, Jonathan said, and the grin came back. 2 local stations. One wants to do a follow-up. The headline was something like Brothers Quick Action Saves Shooting Victim and Kidnapped Woman. I've been asked to do 3 interviews. Your hats aren't going to fit. They already don't. Rita cleared her throat. I hate to break up the reunion, but visiting hours have limits and your brother needs rest. Jonathan stood. looked at me with that expression siblings share, the one that contains every fight, every shared meal, every terrible joke, every moment of genuine terror compressed into a single look. "Hey, John." "Yeah." The comedy club downtown called, said you go on in 30 minutes. "Don't want to be late." Rita, the stoic, composed, unflappable professional, let out a snort of laughter that she immediately tried to convert into a cough. It didn't work. She had to sit down on the other bed in the room, hand over her mouth, shoulders shaking. "You two are an absolute mess," she managed. Jonathan pointed at me. "That's his fault, always has been." He squeezed my foot through the blanket, the only part of me that wasn't bandaged or wired, and walked out. The room got quiet again. The monitors beeped. The air conditioning hummed. Rita composed herself and adjusted my IV with the professional dignity of someone who had definitely not just laughed hard enough to need to sit down. I was alone with the silence and the ceiling and the knowledge that somewhere out there, Anne was alive and recovering and had asked 900 questions about me. And somewhere out there, my brother was probably rehearsing his interview answers in the car. The recovery was going to be long. The reckoning with myself was going to be longer, but I was alive, and so was she. And for the first time since a man in a hoodie appeared on my deck with a .357 and a plan to end everything, that felt like enough. The first time I walked the full length of my hallway without stopping, I cried. Not from pain, though there was plenty of that. A deep, grinding ache in my left side that flared with every breath and turned sharp as a blade whenever I twisted wrong. I cried because the hallway was 42 feet long and it took me 11 minutes. And 3 months ago, I could bench press my body weight and run a 6-minute mile. And now, I was celebrating a journey that my neighbor's golden retriever made 8 times a day without thinking about it. The physical therapist, a compact woman named Trish who had the build of a gymnast and the bedside manner of a drill sergeant, stood at the end of the hall and clapped once. "There it is, 1 lap. Tomorrow we do 2. Tomorrow I might still be standing here. Then you'll have a head start." The hospital discharged me at 4 weeks. Dr. Gupta came by the morning I left, clipboard in hand, that slight smile that I'd learned meant she was about to say something I needed to hear but wouldn't enjoy. "Your lung function is at 82%. That will improve. The rib will ache for months, weather changes, deep breaths, sneezing. You'll know when a cold front is coming better than any meteorologist." Great. A career in weather forecasting, something to fall back on. She didn't laugh. She set the clipboard down and looked at me directly. "Mr. Atkins, Aiden, you're going home to the house where this happened. You're going to sleep in a room 30 feet from where a man tried to kill you. The physical recovery I can help with. The rest is going to require a different kind of work." She paused. "Detective Burns said something to you. I understand the therapist here said the same thing. I'm going to be the 3rd person because apparently you need to hear things in triplicate. Rethink my dating strategy? Rethink all of it. The strategy, the rationalization, the story you've been telling yourself about who you are and what you deserve. You nearly died and a woman nearly burned alive in a car trunk. That's not a wake-up call, Aiden. That's the universe screaming at you through a bullhorn." I didn't have a joke for that one. I just nodded. "I promise, Dr. Angel." She held my gaze for 2 more seconds, making sure the promise had weight. Then she picked up her clipboard and was Dr. Gupta again. "Follow up in 2 weeks. Don't lift anything heavier than a coffee cup. And don't ride that motorcycle until I clear you personally." "Yes, ma'am." Jonathan had handled the house. He'd hired a professional cleaning crew, the kind that specializes in crime scenes because apparently that's an industry, and when I walked through the front door for the first time, the place looked and smelled like a model home. New tile in the dining area, fresh paint on the wall where, well, fresh paint. The Stratocaster was back on its stand, unharmed. Jonathan said he'd moved it to his place during the cleanup and had been keeping it safe, which meant he'd been playing it badly for a month. "Looked like something out of Scarface in here," he told me when he dropped me off. The cleaning crew didn't even flinch. "That's how you know they've seen worse. Anyway, it's done. I replaced the dining chairs too. Figured you didn't want to sit in the same one." He was right, I didn't. The first night alone was hard. The second was harder. The house made sounds I'd never noticed before, the compressor kicking on, a branch tapping the bedroom window, the refrigerator cycling through its hum. Every one of them put my nervous system on alert, sent a jolt of adrenaline through veins that were already running hot. I'd lie there staring at the ceiling fan, a different one. Jonathan had replaced that too, without telling me, because he understood things he'd never say out loud and wait for the chemical flood to recede. I started therapy. Real therapy, not the frustrating hospital sessions where I'd asked more questions than the psychologist and she'd finally said, "Aiden, you're not here to understand the theory. You're here to sit with the feelings long enough to learn what they're telling you." She was right. Sitting with the feelings was the hardest part. Harder than the hallway, harder than the chest tube. Because the feelings, when I finally stopped analyzing and intellectualizing and engineering them into manageable frameworks, were ugly. Guilt that I'd spent years rationalizing away. Shame that no amount of clever argument could dissolve. Grief for a man I'd never met alive but who died 30 feet from my dining table. And underneath all of it, a fear I'd never experienced before, not of death, which I'd seen up close and survived, but of the person I'd been for the last decade. The person who could look at a wedding ring on a woman's finger and see it as a challenge instead of a boundary. The therapist didn't lecture me. She just created the space and waited. And slowly, week by week, the ugly feelings stopped being things I fought against and started being things I learned from. I went back to work at 6 weeks. A contract for a mid-size insurance company that needed their security infrastructure audited, boring, steady work that I could do from my couch in gym shorts with a laptop on my knees and an ice pack on my ribs. The income helped. The routine helped more. Having something to focus on besides the geography of my own mistakes was, it turned out, essential. At 3 months, I was driving again. The truck, not the motorcycle, Dr. Gupta's orders, and she'd somehow acquired my cell number and texted periodic reminders that I suspected were automated but might have been personally sent, which made them funnier and more intimidating at the same time. I hadn't heard from Anne. I knew she was alive. I knew she was recovering. Jonathan had passed along fragments. She'd moved to a rental across town. The boys were in school. She was seeing a therapist. She was doing as well as anyone could. But I didn't reach out. Not because I didn't want to. I picked up the phone 100 times, typed messages I deleted before sending. Drove past the Starbucks where we'd met and kept driving. Because if Anne was rebuilding her life, if she was climbing again, finding her footing after being dragged to the base of the mountain by a man who'd claimed to love her, then the last thing she needed was the other man who'd helped bring the avalanche down. I was part of the wreckage. She needed to clear the debris before she could decide if any of it was worth keeping. So I waited, and read, and healed, and tried for the first time in years to be honest with myself about who I was without the armor of rationalization I'd worn so long it had fused to my skin. 3 months and 2 days after a Wednesday in August that divided my life into before and after, I got in my truck and drove to a Starbucks. The same one, corner table by the window. 2 large coffees, one because I was tired, the second because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. A new book, something about the history of cryptography that had nothing to do with anything except that it was dense enough to require concentration, and concentration was the only reliable anesthetic I'd found. I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't hoping for anything. I was just a man with a scar on his chest trying to remember how to sit in a coffee shop without calculating the exits. I was there about an hour when I sensed someone standing at the edge of my peripheral vision, close enough to be deliberate, still enough to be uncertain. I looked up, and every circuit in my brain went quiet at once. She was standing 4 feet away, holding a paper cup in both hands the way you hold something when you need your fingers to stop shaking. Her hair was different, shorter, just past her shoulders. She was thinner than I remembered, and there along the line of her left cheekbone a scar, faint, fading, but visible. A thin, pale line that traced the geography of the worst morning of her life. She was crying before either of us spoke. Silent tears, the kind that start before you give them permission, rolling down her cheeks and catching the afternoon light through the window. I couldn't move. My brain was doing that split thing again. Half of it flooding with every memory of every conversation we'd ever had. Every laugh, every silence that said more than words. Every moment in a hotel room or this very coffee shop where she'd been the most alive version of herself. The other half was frozen, terrified that if I moved too fast or said the wrong thing, she'd vanish like something I'd imagined from a hospital bed. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "I thought you were going to hate me." Barely above a whisper, that broke the paralysis. I stood up so fast the chair shot backward and hit the counter behind me with a crash that stopped every conversation in the cafe. I didn't notice. I didn't care. I closed the 4 feet between us and put my arms around her, and for a second she went rigid, the reflexive flinch of a body that had recently learned what hands could do, and then she melted. Her arms came around me with a strength that surprised us both, and she buried her face in my shoulder, and I could feel her whole body shaking. My ribs screamed. I did not care even slightly. "I could never hate you," I said into her hair. "Anne, I love you. I've loved you since the first afternoon in this exact spot when you told me my book choice was pedestrian and I should be reading Bishop instead." She laughed through the tears, a wet, broken, beautiful sound. "It was pedestrian. It absolutely was." She pulled back enough to look at me. Her eyes were red, swollen, searching my face for something. Permission, maybe, or proof that this was real. I held her face in my hands, gently, so gently aware of the scar under my left thumb, and kissed her. First one eye, then the other, tasting salt. Then her mouth, and the kiss lasted long enough that someone in the cafe started clapping, and then several someones. And by the time we separated, the whole room was watching, and an older woman at the table nearest us was dabbing her eyes with a napkin. I tried to take a small bow because the moment seemed to call for it, and my ribs delivered an immediate and decisive veto. I winced, folded slightly, and Anne's hands were on me instantly. "Oh God, Aiden, sit down. Are you okay? I'm hurting you." "You are the opposite of hurting me. Sit, please, stay." We sat across from each other at the same corner table where it had all started. Her fingers found mine across the surface and held on. "What did he want?" she asked. "The detective told me some of it." "That you two talked for almost an hour, that he made you," she trailed off. "Drop my pants. Yes, he wanted to see what I had that he didn't. He was very disappointed." She almost smiled, almost. "He wanted to understand why, Anne. That's what kept him from pulling the trigger for 45 minutes. Not mercy, curiosity. He genuinely could not comprehend why you'd risk everything, and he needed me to explain it." "What did you tell him?" "I asked him about your poetry, whether he'd ever read it. He said he hated poetry." I watched her face change, a small contraction, old pain stirring. "I told him about the song we wrote, how you lit up when I played it back. I told him you'd come to me for conversation first, and that we spent most of our time talking, not the other thing. And I tried to explain what you needed, the parts of yourself you couldn't reach inside the life you were living. I used Maslow, the hierarchy, the triangle, the summit." I paused. "He listened, Anne. By the end, I think he understood. He said he wished he'd known sooner. He said he couldn't undo what he'd already done." She was quiet for a long time. Her thumb moved back and forth across my knuckles. "There was a moment," I said, "when I told him you were the most amazing woman I'd ever met. And he looked at me and the anger dropped away for just a second, and he said, 'She is, isn't she? We can agree on that.'" Anne closed her eyes. Tears slipped through. "Do you really think that?" "With all of my heart." She opened her eyes, wiped her face with the back of her hand, took a breath that seemed to reorganize something fundamental inside her. "Aiden, I would love to try." The words were out before she finished the question. I'd been carrying them for 3 months, waiting. "If you're asking what I think you're asking, yes, absolutely yes. It can't be what it was before, you understand that. I don't want what it was before, I want what comes next. The boys, they've been through so much. They don't know the details, not all of them. Someday they will, they need time. They'll get all the time they need, we all will. Can we start slow?" She looked at me with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Not the intellectual spark of our Starbucks conversations, not the hungry freedom of the hotel rooms, something quieter, steadier. A woman who had been broken and had reassembled herself and was now choosing carefully, deliberately, with full knowledge of the cost, to open a door she had every reason to keep locked. "Slow," she said. "I can do slow." "Then slow it is," she smiled. A real smile, the first one that reached all the way. And I thought of something Burns had told me, his wife and her terrible watercolors, the studio light he'd bought so she could paint at night. He hadn't tried to make her better at painting. He just made sure she could do it whenever the urge struck. That was the whole lesson. That was everything I'd understood about other men's wives and failed to offer on my own terms. Until now, Anne glanced at her phone. "I have to pick up the boys in 40 minutes. Then you should go, same time tomorrow?" Same time tomorrow. She stood, I stood. We kissed once more, shorter this time, but with a steadiness to it, a weight that felt like a foundation being poured rather than a firework going off. She walked toward the door, then turned back. Aiden, the book you're reading. She nodded at the cryptography history on the table. Still pedestrian. I laughed. It hurt my ribs. I did not care. She pushed through the door and into the parking lot, the Florida sun catching her hair as she went. I watched her until she reached her car, until she opened the door, until she turned and waved once, a small wave, almost shy, as if we were starting from the very beginning. We were. I sat back down, picked up my coffee, which had gone cold, drank it anyway. Outside the window, the afternoon light was doing that thing it does in Florida in November, golden, warm, low enough to make everything look like a painting. She had to go get the boys. Tomorrow she'd come back, and the day after that. And the ordinary rhythm of two people building something real would begin, not in a hotel room, not in secret, not borrowed from someone else's life. Ours. I looked at the empty chair across from me, still warm from where she'd been sitting. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, the next chapter didn't need to be engineered or strategized or calculated. It just needed to be lived. She called that night after the boys went to bed. They asked who I was smiling at on my phone. What did you tell them? A friend. They didn't buy it. Apparently I don't smile at friends like that. Smart kids. Too smart. They get it from me? Obviously. We talked for 2 hours. Not about the shooting, not about Steve, not about the wreckage, about books. About a documentary she'd watched on the migration patterns of monarch butterflies. About whether cold brew was actually better than regular coffee or just a conspiracy by the marketing industry. About nothing. About everything. It was the conversation I'd been missing for 3 months, and I didn't want to hang up, and neither did she. And we only stopped because she fell asleep mid-sentence describing a poem she was working on, something about a woman climbing a mountain in winter. And I listened to her breathe for a minute before I whispered good night and ended the call. That became the pattern. Every night after the boys were down, the phone would ring. Sometimes 30 minutes, sometimes 3 hours. We were rebuilding the thing that had brought us together in the first place. The connection, the conversation, the feeling of being genuinely heard by another human being, but this time without the secrecy, without the borrowed time, without the exit strategy. We started meeting in public. Coffee first, always at the Starbucks because it felt right to reclaim that place. Then lunch. Then a walk along the lake near her rental where the Spanish moss hung so low you had to duck, and the herons stood in the shallows like gray statues pretending to be patient. She told me about therapy. How the first month had been almost unbearable. The nightmares, the flinching at sudden sounds, the way a car trunk slamming in a parking lot could send her pulse to 180. How the therapist had helped her separate the trauma of what Steve did from the guilt of her own choices. How she'd started writing again, not the guarded, private poetry she'd hidden from Steve, but something rawer. Braver poems that looked at what happened directly and didn't turn away. I want to read them to you, she said one afternoon. We were on a bench by the lake late December, the air finally cool enough to sit outside without drowning in your own sweat. Florida's version of winter, 65 degrees, and everyone wearing jackets like it was the Arctic. I'd love that. She pulled a notebook from her bag. Not a phone, not a tablet, a physical notebook, soft cover, pages thick with handwriting. She opened it to somewhere in the middle, took a breath, and read. I won't reproduce the poem here. It's hers, not mine, and it ended up in her published collection 2 years later. But I can tell you what it did to me. It described a woman at the bottom of a mountain looking up, knowing the climb would hurt, knowing she might not make it, and deciding to go anyway. Not because the summit was guaranteed, because staying at the bottom was no longer survivable. When she finished, she closed the notebook and stared at the lake. That's the best thing you've ever written, I said. How would you know? You haven't read everything. I know, she looked at me, searching again the way she had at the Starbucks. Then she leaned over and kissed me on the cheek, and it was better than any kiss we'd ever shared in a hotel room because it happened on a park bench in daylight where anyone could see and neither of us cared. The boys were harder. Their names were Tyler and Marcus, 12 and 10. Tyler was the quiet one, watchful, cautious, the kind of kid who observed a room for 20 minutes before deciding whether it was safe. Marcus was the opposite, loud, physical, always moving, the first to speak and the last to sit still. They'd been through something no child should experience, and they carried it in different ways. Tyler went inward. Marcus went outward. Both were, as Ann had said, more resilient than she gave them credit for. I met them officially on a Saturday in January. Ann cooked lunch at her rental, nothing fancy, pasta and garlic bread, and I showed up with a six-pack of root beer and absolutely no idea what I was doing. Tyler shook my hand, formal, evaluating. His grip was firmer than I expected from a 12-year-old, and his eyes held mine for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to take a measurement, short enough to not be challenged. Mom says you play guitar. I do. What kind? Stratocaster, Sunburst, 1978. His eyebrows went up slightly, first point of interest. Can you play Eruption? About 60% of it. The tapping section still beats me. Same. A pause. I've been learning on a squeer. And just like that, we had a language. Marcus was simpler to reach and harder to read. He hit me with approximately 40 questions in the first 10 minutes. Did I like football? What was my truck's horsepower? Could I do a backflip? Had I ever seen a shark? What was my favorite video game? Did I know karate? I answered all of them honestly, including no to the backflip and karate questions, which seemed to earn more respect than a yes would have. But underneath the rapid-fire interrogation, there was a guardedness. Marcus had lost his father, not to divorce, not to distance, but to violence and finality, and the last man who'd occupied a central role in his life had put his mother in a trunk. He wasn't going to trust a replacement just because the replacement brought root beer and knew the horsepower of his truck. That was fair. I didn't push. I showed up. Every Saturday at first, then Wednesdays too. I helped with homework I barely understood. When did 6th grade math become theoretical physics? I attended soccer games and sat in the bleachers and cheered at the right moments and learned which kid was which and memorized jersey numbers. I fixed a leaking faucet in Ann's kitchen and taught Tyler a blues scale and let Marcus beat me at video games often enough that he suspected I was letting him win, which I was, but he couldn't prove it. Months passed. The Saturday lunches became Saturday dinners. The Wednesday visits became Wednesday and Thursday. Tyler started leaving his bedroom door open when I was in the house, a small thing that Ann noticed before I did and had to step into the bathroom to cry about. Marcus stopped testing me with questions and started telling me things instead, about school, about his friend who had a dirt bike, about a girl he maybe sort of liked but definitely didn't like, and I wasn't supposed to tell anyone, especially Tyler. Jonathan came over for dinner one night and immediately became the boys' favorite human. He told stories that were 70% true and 30% enhanced for entertainment value. He arm-wrestled Marcus and lost convincingly. He looked at Tyler's squeer and spent an hour adjusting the action and intonation until it played like a guitar twice its price. When he left, Marcus asked Ann when the cool uncle was coming back. "He's not your uncle," Ann said. "Yet," Tyler said, not looking up from his guitar. Ann and I looked at each other across the kitchen, and something settled into place between us. Not a decision, a recognition, like watching the last piece of a puzzle slide home. We got married on a Saturday afternoon in October, 2 years after that Wednesday in August. Small ceremony. Backyard of the house we'd bought together. A 4-bedroom place with a big yard and a porch and enough room for 2 boys, 2 guitars, and a desk by the window where Ann could write. Jonathan was best man. Tyler and Marcus stood next to him in matching suits that they complained about for approximately 90 minutes before the ceremony, and then refused to take off until midnight because, as Marcus said, "I look distinguished." He was 12 and used the word distinguished, and Tyler told him he didn't know what it meant, and Marcus said, "It means I look better than you," and Ann had to separate them before the cake was cut. The press found out. Of course they did. The story had been local news when it happened. Brothers' quick action saves shooting victim and kidnapped woman. And a wedding between the victim and the kidnapped woman was irresistible to every outlet within 100 miles. Jonathan handled the media with the natural comfort of someone who'd been waiting his entire life for a spotlight, and I let him, because somebody had to talk to the cameras and it wasn't going to be me. The public reaction was split. Most people, when they heard the full story, responded with something between sympathy and wonder. Strangers recognized us at restaurants, at the grocery store, at Tyler's school events. Some of them hugged us. An elderly couple at a gas station in Kissimmee told Anne that love won, and Anne cried in the car for 10 minutes afterward. But not everyone felt that way. There were people, some online, some in person, who saw the story from Steve's side. The man who'd been betrayed, who'd lost his wife to an affair, who'd snapped under a weight that Aiden Atkins had helped pile on. To them, I wasn't a survivor. I was the cause, the original sin, and our marriage was proof that the cheaters won and the faithful husband died. I learned to take it, not to argue, not to justify, not to deploy the rationalizations I'd spent a decade polishing. When a man at a youth soccer game recognized me and said, loud enough for the neighboring parents to hear, that I was the piece of trash who got a cop killed, I didn't respond with philosophy or engineering metaphors about unstable systems. I said, "You're right that I made terrible choices and a man died because of it, and I have to live with that every day." And I walked away. And the man had nothing else to say because you can't fight someone who agrees with you. Anne changed. Not in the way people change when they're performing growth for an audience, the social media redemption arc, the inspirational memoir cash-in. She changed the way a plant changes when you move it from a dark closet to a window, quietly, continuously, in a direction that was always there but never had light. She finished her poetry collection. It took her 18 months, written at the desk by the window while the boys were at school and the house was quiet, and the Florida light made everything in the room look warm. The book was called Base Camp, and it tracked a woman's journey from the bottom of a mountain to somewhere above the clouds, and it was published by a small press in Tampa that specialized in poetry nobody read and everybody should have. It didn't become a bestseller. It became something better, a book that the right people found at the right time and held onto like a rope. She started a support group. It began as a conversation with her therapist about how isolated she'd felt during the marriage, how she'd been unable to tell anyone what was missing, how the silence had become its own kind of prison. The therapist suggested she might not be alone in that experience. She wasn't. The group started with 4 women and grew to 14. Then it expanded to include couples. Anne facilitated, using her own story not as a script but as a door. A way of saying, I know this territory, I've been lost here too. Let me show you where the path is. Some of those couples made it, some didn't. But at least 3 that I know of pulled back from the edge of divorce, and one husband, a quiet electrician named Frank, who reminded me painfully of the Bob I'd imagined in my kitchen that night a lifetime ago, told me at a barbecue that Anne had saved his marriage by teaching him to ask his wife one question he'd never thought to ask. What did she want to be when she was 22? His wife wanted to be a veterinarian. She was 41. Frank helped her enroll in community college that fall. I thought about that a lot. About how the worst thing I'd ever been part of had somehow produced, through Anne's alchemy, a version of the help I'd claimed to be offering all those years, except real this time. Not a breath of stolen oxygen, but an actual open window. The years accumulated the way years do, not in a line, but in layers. Tyler graduated high school and enrolled at UCF, where he studied music production and grew his hair past his shoulders and called me twice a week to ask about gear. Marcus became exactly the kind of relentless, charismatic human being you'd expect from a kid who asked 40 questions in 10 minutes. He ran for student government, made varsity baseball, and maintained a social life so active that Anne and I communicated primarily through a shared calendar app that updated more often than the stock market. Jonathan never married. He said he was too busy being the cool uncle, which was partially true and partially a deflection from a more complicated truth about a man who'd walked into his brother's house and killed a stranger, and carried that weight with a grace I didn't think I could have managed. He and I never talked about it directly after that first conversation in the hospital. It lived between us the way certain things live between brothers, acknowledged in a look, a pause, a hand on a shoulder that lasts a beat too long. He was the best man at my wedding and the best man in my life, and I told him that once on his birthday after enough bourbon to make honesty feel possible, and he said, "Don't make it weird, baby bro," and then didn't let go of the hug for a long time. 10 years. 10 years since a steak on a grill and a man in a hoodie and a .357 Magnum, and a conversation that should have ended in death, but instead, through the improbable arrival of a brother with a Glock and a habit of showing up uninvited for dinner, ended in something else entirely. I was 46 now. There was gray in my hair that Anne said made me look seasoned, which I suspected was a generous synonym for old. The scar on my chest had faded to a pale ridge that the boys had stopped noticing years ago, but that I felt every morning when I put on a shirt, a daily reminder written in my own skin. I still worked in cybersecurity, still played the Strat, still drank too much coffee and not enough water, still rode the motorcycle which Dr. Gupta had eventually cleared me for, with the caveat that if I ended up in her ER again, she would let the intern do the surgery. But I didn't date married women. Never again. Not once. The promise I'd made in a hospital bed, staring at a ceiling I'd memorized, held. Not because I was afraid, though the scar served as a compelling daily argument for caution. Because I'd finally understood something that all my studying, all my theories about operating systems and emotional intelligence and the complex architecture of the human female had somehow missed. You can understand someone completely and still be wrong about what you owe them. I owed Anne honesty. I owed her children stability. I owed the memory of a man who died on my dining room floor, a man who was flawed and violent and chemically compromised, but who had, in his own broken way, loved his wife, the basic decency of not repeating the pattern that had ended his life. We think we're so smart. We think we have it all figured out. We feel entitled, that's the word, isn't it? Entitled to pleasure, to connection, to the exception that proves we're different from everyone else who ever rationalized their way into someone else's marriage. But it's physics. Action and reaction. Every force you exert comes back, and it doesn't care about your reasons or your theories or your carefully constructed argument that monogamy is an unstable system. The system held for 10 years now, stable as anything I've ever built. I was sitting on the porch last week, watching Marcus throw a baseball with Jonathan in the backyard while Tyler played something gentle on his acoustic inside the house, and Anne sat next to me grading papers from the creative writing class she'd started teaching at the community college. The light was doing that November thing again, golden and low and kind. "What are you thinking about?" Anne asked, not looking up from her papers. "I'm thinking about how everyone kept calling me the same thing in the hospital." "What's that?" "That I was the most fortunate man alive." She put down her pen, looked at me. That expression, the one that had evolved over 10 years from cautious hope to something deeper, warmer, less fragile. "Are you?" I watched Jonathan tackle Marcus on the grass while the kids screamed that it was a foul. Listened to Tyler's guitar drifting through the screen door. Felt Anne's hand find mine on the armrest of the porch chair, her fingers settling into the spaces between mine the way they always did, like they'd been designed for exactly this configuration. "I don't see myself as the asshole anymore," I said. "I haven't for a long time." The word that comes to mind now is the one everyone kept saying to me, all the way back in that hospital room when I was full of tubes and guilt and holes. I turned to her. "I am the most fortunate man alive." I squeezed her hand. Emphasis on alive.